Welcome back, week number 2. I hope you are enjoying the series and enjoying your life group together. As we get into this story about Elijah, we just get into this moment where Elijah just had 2 crazy victories in a row. I mean, you've seen God move in great ways, and then he says, God, take my life. Just think about that. That just reveals to us that even after victories and those things, that we do become the most vulnerable when we're the most tired and exhausted. I think sometimes we have to look at our lifestyle. There's studies and more studies that show, more research pointing to that our lifestyles at times can be some of the leading cause of some of our issues. Just the way we live. We're not designed to go this high-paced life without getting rest, sleep, and whatever it may be, just intensity. A car is not designed to be at the highest red line RPM nonstop. I think that's the way we just live. It's almost like we need a hit. We need to be always going or feeling needed or pushing or driving something. And so but we also need to, if we're dealing with issues, we need to, we've dealt with week 2 is just imbalances. We need to be aware of the pace that we're setting. In race car world, there's a pace car that goes ahead, that sets the pace. And we need things in our lives to help set that pace, to help set that thing. And so we need to get back to wondering, if my life is in balance, that's a good gauge. As my emotions, everything are in balance, then we have to look at my lifestyle. Is the way I live in balance? And the imbalance comes to, what are we focused on? And so many years ago, the truth is, and I've said this before on a Sunday morning, is that I preached a message about 10 years ago at a retreat, and I was sharing about having spiritual balance. I got done preaching that message. I thought it was great. And when I got done preaching, a pastor friend of mine came and goes, that was a great message, but actually a terrible message at the same time. You delivered it well, but it's actually wrong. And I was like, why is it wrong? He goes, and I was kind of shocked by it. And he goes, because you're preaching balance, which is horizontal, and you need to be preaching priorities, which is vertical. Priorities are this way, and balance is this way. It's like walking on a tightrope. If you're working on balance, that means something is about to fall. If you're always trying to figure out to stay there, you're always trying to make sure this works, you're trying to have family here, or relationships here, and God here, and everything here, and it's like trying to balance it out. But he says you need to flip it to here, and then within that same few months, I heard an illustration about the big rocks in your life. There's going to be a picture up on the screen that they're going to picture of an illustration of big rocks, and the picture shows 2 jars. One is full of, both of them have rocks and sand and pebbles and everything in it. But it's interesting, if you look at this illustration, one is if you put the small things in first, the sand, the pebbles, and the rocks in first, it doesn't fit. But if you put the big stuff in first, the big stuff goes in first and everything else comes around it and it fits. That's the same with priorities. Imbalances come when we're more concerned about the pebbles and the sand and the small things, and we're not as concerned about the priorities and the big rocks in our lives. There's an imbalance that we kind of focus on the minors and we forget about the major things, the main things. Stephen Covey has it this way: the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. That's the main thing. We get out of balance when we have the minor things become the most important things and not the main things. Sometimes it's not that people who change, but it's the priorities in our life begin to change, and then we begin to change. It's a realization that I need to focus on the big rocks in my life. And listen, I'm telling you, if the main thing is off, everything becomes off. Everything. And this is what I talked about. Like, we get stuck in our gauges. We look at the emotions, we look at different things, and we're guided by this. And I look at my own life and say, if we focus not on the main things but the minor things, we miss out on the main things, which leads to different things. Like, now I'm comparing my life to somebody else, like we talked about on Sunday morning, or we start going into other traps in our own life, and we start thinking about, how this comes across, or different things. But I'm just going to tell you, we need to come back to living a life that's focused on priorities, not imbalance. So in a clip coming up with our in-house therapist, we start talking a little bit about imbalances and how that is in our own life, and even self-talk and comparing, or what that may be. And after that discussion, then we have a few questions for you and a verse to talk together. But go ahead and watch this clip. Back at week number 2, and we're talking about Elijah going in the cave. And so that's a good spiritual point of watching and why Elijah just got done with this crazy miracle, and then he asked God to take his life, and then he went into a cave. And so the question is, I think a lot of us have a tendency to go into cave or battle that. And so talking with Joe and Brooke here today about just that, some of the reasons, we're going to spend the next few weeks at church talking about why do we go into caves and why do we do this. And so just like imbalances and comparing and what brought Elijah in there. So I just want to have you guys' thoughts on where we're at with this story. Why did Elijah go in there, and why do we tend to go in there too?
I think the imbalance thing is so interesting when I'm working with, women in particular. Women are caregivers. We, sort of pour ourselves into the people, and we pour ourselves so much that we forget about us. Like, we forget to fill ourselves. And it's almost like you don't even see it when it's happening. You're so outward focused, making meals or prepping something or organization, or getting somebody somewhere. You're running on empty. And in that process, you kind of lose, your own way of thinking about yourself, or even just, connection to the people around you giving back to you, including time with God. I have people in my office, and sometimes I'll give a verse or something about, how God feels about them, or, that you're created by Him. And they, yeah. And it's not, that's, I don't want to hear that. That's not what it is. It's almost like they don't slow down enough to really take in the meaning of that. And I think that happens with, just even sitting down to eat, or making sure you're getting enough sleep, or doing something that you love, looking at something you love, the flowers in your backyard even. People, women in particular, and my men have other things, but women,
we do plenty of things.
And I love working with men too in a different way, but women just really forget to take some time for them, and it can't all come out. It has to come in too.
Yeah.
I like how C.S. Lewis describes us as spiritual beings trapped in a physical body, and makes a lot of sense. And I love this story of Elijah because I use it all the time with my clients, because I start everybody I work with how are you eating, how are you sleeping, are you exercising? Because if you're doing the basics, we're giving our bodies the strength, and we're living life the way God designed it. So God designed us to function a certain way. If you're not getting 7 hours of sleep, you're not going to be doing very well. And
I think people don't know it's so simple.
Yep. And sometimes that's all you need to do with people. And then, it's not good for billing, but then we're done. So, but everybody needs to do that. I need to. My life's better now since I learned these simple things. It makes life way more manageable. So you need to sleep and you need to eat well. You need, your neurochemistry runs on the food you take in. Serotonin, it's just, there's so much help there. And then exercise is so key. And people don't realize it. Just getting cardiovascular for 20 minutes, you give yourself 6 brain chemicals that are going to be really beneficial. BDNF, GABA, serotonin, dopamine, endorphins, and endocannabinoids. It's this clarity and this calm. It helps you think better, increases the blood flow to your brain, and also reduces the chance of Alzheimer's later on. There's some really neat studies. When Elijah was laying under the broom tree, wanting to die, after just having this huge success, this huge win, epic, he was exhausted and hungry. And what did an angel do? He came to him and gave him a cake, some water, and said, go back to sleep. So if we start with that, we're going to have the bandwidth to do the more difficult, challenging things.
It's interesting. Like you go back to that simple analogy. If you're in an airplane, you put your own oxygen on before you help somebody else. And it's such a simple analogy, but it's like what you guys were saying. Like if you don't, you're no good at anybody else if you can't breathe, if you're dying yourself.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So help you before you help your son or daughter, help you make sure you're breathing good. And so, like you're saying, Elijah just had this big moment, and then all of a sudden he says, God, take my life.
Yeah.
And so like he just admitted, I'm not okay. I think sometimes too, we talk about imbalances and we talk about even that comparison trap, like how that sends us in a spiral. We look at everybody else and we compare our lives to somebody else. Just give me your thoughts on what that does to a person, like what you think that does to our own self as you guys look at that.
Well, your beliefs drive your feelings drive your actions. So it's all about these beliefs. And if you have this belief that you're inadequate compared to everyone else, then you're going to feel depressed or anxious, depending how you're wired, and you're going to act accordingly. So the key is understanding what you truly believe and having that be as accurate as possible. And so when you talk about belief, that's kind of nebulous, right? How do you grab onto that? What's a belief? An easier way to think about it, which has really helped me, is you think about it as a habit of thought. So instead of this nebulous belief, it's this habit of thought that you have and you've established over years or months or however long. And you can change a habit of thought by creating a new one that is the truth. And then every time you go back on the old one, you catch yourself more often than not, and you go to the new one. And the nice thing is this, you create these neural pathways. And if you stay off a neural pathway, they start disconnecting and fading. And you can create a new neural pathway. So neurons will actually change. You'll change the structure of your brain by creating accurate new beliefs. And we can show you on an MRI before and after, and you can make a physical change even.
And you can see it physically happen when you make a new pathway in your brain by creating a new habit.
Yep. And so you replace lies with truth.
Yeah.
Which is so scriptural, right? As a man thinks, so is he.
It's funny you just say the word. It makes me wonder how many people go down that area of depression or anxiety feeling inadequate. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
I think too, a root is our belief about God and how we see God. Because if you really connect with the love of God, know God and what just that joy, that peace that surpasses understanding and connection to God, it's powerful. And the circumstances around you can still be the same. There can be loss, there can be pain, suffering even. And you just have this peace with him. I was just reading recently a book of a Chinese pastor who, it's unimaginable what this man went through for Jesus, what he experienced in prisons, what he, no food and cold and naked and just all the things. And every time that, he'd just connect with God, even in that place, he would be filled with joy. He'd be singing in the middle of a cold, dark prison. And I think that can only happen when we have a real picture of who God is. So a lot of times in my work, what I'm doing is trying to, find these little spots to chip away at a picture of God that isn't right, that keeps someone from feeling that peace.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And how many times do people picture God as their dad or their father, which
Yes.
may have been very inadequate in many cases?
Always inadequate, really.
True. Always inadequate, but sometimes more inadequate. But in realizing that, that's a revelation there. Like, oh, wait a minute, that's not what God is. And then we look at His handiwork and scriptures and start recreating both the belief about God, but then your belief about yourself, and then your belief about the future.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can manage those areas and keep growing, feelings follow. Depression lifts, anxiety lifts, and functionality follows.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, that's so good. Awesome. Thank you so much.